Hello everyone, thank you so much. Wow, what an evening. What a night. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with this channel, I've started this series where I am in a self-driving car, in this case a Tesla Model Y, and I let it drive me around. So I just activated the full self-driving feature, and I just kind of share my thoughts about what's going on in the world as this car drives me around, sort of to highlight how our world is changing like crazy, and you know what could happen. And yeah, for those that have followed the channel for a while, you already know that this format exists. If you're not familiar with how a Tesla self-driving car works, this blue line basically means that the system is on, and at any point I can take over. It will ask me to make sure that I'm around from time to time, and so what I need to do is put a little bit of a pressure on the steering wheel. You see a message come up on the screen, and that basically means that, hey, the car is looking for some sort of input from me to make sure that I'm alive. It's not actually steering the car when I do that input, but it does let it know that I'm alive and I'm actually paying attention. So, like for example, that lane change, it did it on its own. I didn't press the stalk, obviously, as you saw on the camera. My feet are off the pedals, but I am paying attention 100%, and I'm ultimately responsible for the car. So anyway, just wanted to give a little bit of a background there. So yesterday, Elon Musk hosted a Twitter space with a journalist from BBC. I believe his first name is James. I forget his last name, and I kind of forgot his first name too. Probably should have done a little bit more diligence here. I'm not a journalist. But they basically sat down and did a space together, and it was a fascinating about hour and a half-ish interview between this reporter and Elon Musk. And the announcement was made a little bit last minute, so about 10 minutes before the space went live, Elon Musk made an announcement that, hey, I'm sitting down with this BBC journalist and we're going to talk. And it was a very fascinating insight into a lot of different things. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, I'll make sure to leave a link to the space in the comment section below and in the description. And then I'm also going to post the video and content that BBC have published after the space was finished, so that you can kind of compare and contrast between the two. Really what stuck out to me from the conversation was a lot of different things. So as somebody who follows Tesla very closely, as somebody who follows Twitter very closely, I'm very active on Twitter. I'm an investor in Tesla. I own a Tesla. I worked at Tesla. There's a lot of layers that I have as a person that has me very closely tied to this story. I took away a lot of really fascinating and interesting things from this interview. So at a high level, what struck me was that it does seem like the Twitter story with Elon Musk taking over the company has taken sort of a life of its own around this whole notion of misinformation. Twitter is bad at sort of limiting hateful content or tagging things in an appropriate manner so that it prevents hate speech, and it's sort of, you know, all these different layers around how Twitter is a bad platform. And during this space, it was quite clear, I think, for parts of it at least, that the journalist was trying to draw out that information from Elon Musk in a way that, I don't know, it was interesting. It's very interesting how the line of questioning was coming about. So one of the biggest sort of talking points which went viral here overnight, and I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it's sort of caught fire pretty quickly, is that there was this segment during the interview where the journalist was asking Elon Musk about hate speech on the rise on the platform, and how hate speech experts and people are saying that it's on the rise and that it's a potential problem for the platform. And Elon Musk asked the journalist himself, he said, hey, do you see a rise in hate speech? And the journalist said, you know, there are things that came up which caused me to stop using the For You section, which is the algorithmic section of the platform. And Elon Musk is like, hey, can you show me at least one? And the journalist failed to even bring one up, which was just absolutely fascinating from the conversation. And there's a cow on the right. I don't know if you can see them on the camera. And that was a very interesting exchange. So the journalist was pushing on Elon Musk on this misinformation, this hate speech specific thing that was happening on the platform. And there was a lack of essentially proof that was behind that claim. The journalist kind of deflected and said, hey, well, the experts are saying this is happening. I'm not necessarily saying it's happening. I left the For You because I saw things that he quoted as slightly racist or slightly sexist, and he still wasn't able to come up with those examples, which to me, I think highlighted an interesting dynamic on how journalists in this day and age with legacy media seem to be attacking what it means to actually be a journalist. It's sort of this whole, and I think it's something that has been felt by a lot of the public, is that this gotcha journalism that impacts everybody from all walks of life, all political spectrums. And it's all about generating headlines, and it's all about generating attention around something that maybe it's not really the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but it's something that's salient and something that can catch fire. And having been in YouTube for a little over a year now, I totally understand why that dynamic exists. It's because media is largely incentivized by clicks. That's how all these publications make money, is by driving clicks. I'm going to push the car along here a little bit. That's why I have my foot on the pedal, just to give this guy behind me some space to get into the intersection. And so that was absolutely fascinating to watch live. And in addition to that, if you listen to the space in its entirety, and then you look at some of the sort of publications that are some of the articles and media that BBC put out related to that conversation, they did a lot of different content around this. So they did a segmented piece of an article that highlighted part of the conversation. They also did a 90-second or so video sort of summarizing the conversation, how they thought it should be summarized. Then there was a BBC News piece that there was a lady and a gentleman were talking about their takes on the interview with James and Elon. And watching that whole thing sort of come through. Oh, and they also had a 2-minute segment of that sort of very contentious conversation that Elon and James were having. Again, I'm sorry if I don't have his first name right, but I believe his name is James. And so they air that as well. And what's fascinating to see is that parts of it, I believe, are being justly sort of reported on that article specifically. I think a lot of it was just reporting. But then there were parts of it as well where they had a section in the article that was highlighting this sort of hate speech thing that, experts are claiming that the hate speech is on the rise, but there was no citation for the hate speech on the rise. So it's almost like, I'm going to take this down to the speed limit here, that hate speech is on the rise, but there was no citation for that claim. And so it was very interesting watching that on the article, that there's this claim, there's no citation for it. And again, they're saying, well, if hate speech is on the rise, and Elon Musk very clearly debunked that on the article from his perspective, on the video from his perspective, the interview, saying hey, you can't even provide one. So why would you even bring it up as a journalist that this is an issue when you can't even tell me one example of this happening? And that to me is just very, very strange. As a journalist, one would think that you're somebody who's trying to maximize the truth, somebody who's trying to bring forward what's actually happening, what the people need to know that is actually the real truth of what's happening. But it's this sort of lazy thing where it's well, somebody said this, and so I'm going to ask you about it. Somebody said this, what do you think? Okay, what's an example of that thing? I don't have any. What are you doing? Is that really? Is that journalism, yo? Somebody tell me in the comment section, is that journalism? Is that journalism? To me, it's no different than freaking me on YouTube. I'm just a guy on YouTube who's making content because I love it, but I'm also trying my best to inform the public on what I think is happening with a myriad of things. Yet we have this sort of person in this role of journalist doing kind of the same thing, but they're affiliated to this organization in the BBC that theoretically, you know, when you think about BBC, you know, when we all have a vision, you guys tell me if you guys are going through this too, you have a vision of, hey, respected organizations, been around for a really long time. I'm sure they hire the best of the best, funded by the British taxpayer. They just must be so good at everything. And it's so obvious that they're not. That they're not. In this sort of space was obvious that there's faults, there's weaknesses in the system. And so this opens up a broader question about, okay, so how often does this happen? How often does this happen? How many different publications, how many different organizations approach things in this manner where it's kind of haphazard, not really necessarily based on truth, but it's based on generating a talking point, you know? It's very eye-opening, especially with a publication like the BBC, again, which very large, one of the largest news publications, media publications in the world. They're not perfect. They're not perfect. And so, yeah. So that was really fascinating to watch. That was really fascinating to watch, really fascinating to listen to, really fascinating to read through. And there are other pieces of the conversation too that were very fascinating to me. So one of them was when they were talking about Twitter laying off 7,000 people or 6,500 people because of the dire straits that the company was in. And it was framed at the very beginning of the interview as something that was very controversial and something that was, oh my God, I can't believe you did this. It's controversial. And the question becomes like, why is it controversial? You know, and this is sort of a broader discussion in how media can generate narratives, right? If you've been following the Twitter story from the very beginning, you know that there was this really crazy back and forth between Elon Musk and Twitter. Elon Musk put a bid to buy the company. Twitter said, you cannot buy our company. Then Elon's like, I don't want to buy your company anymore because I think you're lying about the bots. And then the company's like, well, you have to buy it now because you said you were going to. So they didn't want him to buy it. Elon Musk didn't want to buy it. Then they're like, you have to buy it. So, okay, weird. So then when he buys it, the picture that was outlined by Elon Musk is that, hey, you have a company that was generating $4.5 billion of revenue. It's now down to $3 billion. And now the expenses are up from $4.5 billion to $6 billion because of the interest on the loan that he had to take out to actually purchase the product, the Twitter in this case, the Twitter. And so when that happened, it created this huge shortfall, this $3 billion shortfall cash flow. So basically it was losing $3 billion a year in cash. And it only had $1 billion in the bank, so it had 4 months to live. And so there was a decision that had to be made by Elon Musk and the management team there, probably Elon Musk in this case solely because he owns the damn thing, especially early on, that, hey, we need to make drastic decisions. We need to get rid of people. We need to do something to make sure that we don't die. And so the justification from Elon Musk was, hey, I am going to make a decision to lay off this many people because they're likely not needed, or it's a drastic thing. And he said the word himself, it was a haphazard decision during that time of the company. And so the journalists approached this as, hey, this is controversial because you didn't give people a heads up that they're losing their jobs. You didn't, tell these 6,500 people, hey, you're losing your job today. And that's like messed up and it's uncaring. But I think, I think I can see the point. I can see the point of the journalist saying, well, it's not really cool that you laid off all these people. But I think it also dismisses the fact that Twitter probably wasn't a well-run company, that when somebody takes over the company, it only has 4 months to live, and the owner now has to take drastic action to save the company. And then the journalist said, well, you are the richest person in the world. Why don't you basically, insinuating, why don't you just stopgap the fall? Why don't you just, say, well, I bought it and it's dying, and so I'm just going to cover your jobs in the meantime to make sure that you don't lose your job. And I think a lot of that, I think it's just so much context is missed when that happens, right? And why do I say that? Look at where Twitter is today. It's been roughly 6 months, 7 months since Elon Musk finalized the acquisition of Twitter. It went from 8,000 employees to 1,500 employees. It has the largest user base it's ever had. I personally think Twitter is a much livelier place than it used to be. It's much more informative. It's much more entertaining. It performs better for me, and I don't know. I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me, it definitely performs better. And it's doing so with 6,500 less people. It went from 8,000 people to 1,500. And so the question doesn't become, in my mind, I don't think it's like, hey, why are you such a scumbag for letting all these people go? The question becomes, why did Twitter have 8,000 people? Why did Twitter have 8,000 people when you can continue to run the company with 1,500 and arguably the platform's better? Especially when the journalist himself cannot prove during the interview that the thing that they are claiming is a problem. Look at this gentleman is in my lane in the car, reacted appropriately, fantastic. The gentleman that's saying, hey, you have all these people that you let go is causing a deterioration of your platform, and that's why you shouldn't have let go of 6,500 people, and you can't prove that that's actually happening. What are you actually asking? Like, what's happening here? What are you actually trying to get to? You know? And I think that's when it starts becoming clear that I do believe, listen, props to the journalists for even be willing to having this thing on Spaces and it being broadcasted to everybody. That's an unusual thing from journalists that I found, that they decide, somebody has decided to do this openly, allow Twitter to broadcast this whole thing unedited, and then the journalists can take this work and give it to the people at BBC that can do with it whatever they want. So props to him for having that transparency. But it's quite obvious to me that there was some sort of agenda or some underlying thing that the journalist, I think, was trying to go after, which is, you let go of 6,500 people, hate speech is on the rise, the platform is worse off because there are things that experts are saying is causing more and more problems, yet you can't even back that up, and Twitter is bigger than ever. And so it's just weird. It's just weird, man. I don't get it. I really don't get it. That to me seems obvious. That to me seems obvious that there was that was the sort of broad story that the journalist was trying to capture. He asked other questions within that framing during the interview that either are meant to, maybe take Elon's guard down or try to, break stuff out as well that's valuable. But it seemed like that was sort of the overarching story, is like, Twitter is more hateful because he let go of 6,500 people. But he can't even prove that that's the case. Journalism. So that's the state of the of that specific, I don't know. It's so odd. Tell me in the comments if I'm thinking about this incorrectly, man. Tell me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly. The other things we learned during this conversation is that Twitter is about cash flow break even, call it, which means basically that Twitter is no longer losing money, that it's a company that is basically able to survive on its own. It doesn't really need to borrow more cash, and it doesn't need to do anything drastic, that it can keep going, but it's not generating money, right? So as a company, businesses, it's a good idea to generate a profit so you can actually run your business and bring returns to your shareholders and investors. And so there is a expectation that the company will start generating a profit here in the next few months or so, which I think is again, another rhetoric buster or another sort of narrative buster that says Elon is going to sink Twitter, it's going to destroy Twitter, and the opposite is happening. The opposite is happening. Or at least it appears that is happening. And then we also have a situation too where I really do think this Twitter space, the sort of thing that happened last night as the car biases towards the left to give space to the truck. One of the coolest behaviors from the latest version of full self-driving, by the way, is that it really highlights just how important it is to be transparent, man. You know, I think one of the biggest weaknesses of legacy media today, BBC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, I don't know, who cares? Name your publication. Is that they're in this sort of old style of journalism, reporting, and media that is bite-sized, driven, short attention span driven, and, you know, trying to get things as compressed as humanly possible. And then the journalists and the media publication have the freedom to interpret, and they have the freedom to convey what they think is the most important or salient points from a given conversation. And with a place like Twitter Spaces, with things like YouTube live streams, with things like podcasting, we're moving towards this arena that now we have a medium for ideas to be fully explored, for conversations to be broad-ranging and in long form, and not so much I'm trying to squeeze everything I think I need to squeeze out of you for 10 minutes, you know, after recording you for an hour and a half, so that I can tell you, so I can tell the people that follow me what I want them to hear. And that, to me, seems like it's dying. And I have a sense, and you tell me in the comments, I have a sense, just talking to people, regular people, when I go out and these conversations come up either at, I don't know, with friends or at a bar somewhere or at a public event or something, you know, when they just naturally starts almost evolving or devolving into this, is that there's a general mistrust in the public, I feel. And it's because of a lack of transparency. And one of the biggest things that Twitter could do, truly, for the public, I believe, is to maximize transparency. For everybody, not just for one side of the political spectrum or one side of thoughts. I am biased because I'm biased, because I'm a human being. Every single person is biased in their own way, right? We all live in a series of bubbles. We're all in our own little bubble, and our bubbles are sort of like overlapping, right? A lot of people have talked about this concept. This gentleman, there's a reason why they got backed into. Okay, so the car, that was all the car trying to figure out what to do with this guy. Okay, so we got some lane markings here that were a little, okay, good. So the car, I thought, performed that very, very well given the circumstances. Boy, that car really got smashed up, eh? So, Twitter transparency. I really think that's Twitter's by far its biggest strength, is that it can bring transparency to the world. And I think it's going to create this sort of, incentive structure, I think, where the individual is going to have the power. Poor guy. Oof. Dang, I wish I could have pulled over. Oh well, sorry. Hopefully his friend is on the way. It's going to create this environment where the public, through that transparency, hopefully can be in control of the narrative. And this is something that Elon Musk brought up on that space, which I thought was one of the biggest takeaways, in my opinion, is that the public is now in charge of what the narrative is, not media publications, not individuals at these organizations that are kind of black boxes, right? That get to decide what we see and what we don't see. Just put it out all on the table, or create a platform or an incentive structure that incentivizes everybody to put everything on the table, right? And things like Twitter Spaces are very powerful in that way. It really creates that platform for all of us to come together and discuss ideas openly. Now the question becomes, how many people will want to do that? How many people will want to go on and actually share their point of view? How can we make sure that it's not sort of it doesn't turn into its own bubble, and it doesn't turn into its own sort of small section of the internet that is just a freaking echo chamber that keeps passing around its own ideas to itself. And that's where I think Twitter's biggest challenge is going to be to incentivize truth, incentivize transparency through being able to monetize the platform in that manner, right? So monetize truth, monetize transparency, and the creators that are on Twitter that maximize that earn the most. Truth and transparency. Truth and transparency. But how do we do that, right? And that's the biggest question I think that Twitter's gonna have to answer. Is like, how does it's trying to get on the left lane, there's a lot of traffic coming on the left, so it aborted. How do we do that? How can Twitter make truth and transparency profitable? Is that even a concept that is possible? Or are we just gonna be forever in this state of, well, humans will forever want to, there's multiple lanes here on the road, I don't know what the car is gonna do, and it seems like it's handling this perfectly. Looks like they're doing some road work construction on Route 1 here. Good, great, fantastic. Really well done. Yeah, so how do we make that happen? Is that a possible thing? Can we talk about, how Twitter could maximize profits for creators by the creator being in charge of maximizing truth and transparency? Yeah, and this is just a little bit of the conversation, to be completely honest. I haven't really taken too much time to really delve into what every single point and every single word that was uttered. I listened to it fully last night, the whole space, in one pass. I read and watched different things from the BBC just to get their side. And I thought the BBC did okay. I thought parts of it was clearly trying to be spun to say a certain narrative. I thought the journalists could have been a lot more prepared. I get that it's last minute, but when you have one of the most influential and spoken about personalities, and you have him for probably as long as you want him, even though you were probably given a time limit, just take advantage of the situation. I think that person could have been a little bit more prepared. And I thought it was very weird that at the end of the interview, the interviewer cut the interview short, not the interviewee. So, the person from BBC was the one who cut the interview short, in a way, because he kind of ran out of questions, didn't have other things to ask. And, and I think that's because they have a deadline at BBC, and they're like, yo, try to get this story out by X time so we can have it available for the morning news on, in the UK, which is their home sort of audience with the BBC. And so that kind of highlights just how legacy media is kind of like a dying breed, in a sense. If it was an independent journalist, like let's say I had the opportunity to be in that room with Elon Musk, I would be squeezing every freaking second I can. Because I'm like, dude, I have you in a room, let's ask you as many questions as humanly possible, And I would have one camera, maybe two cameras, and I would have enough battery and equipment for it to last me, 17,000 hours. So yeah. So that was just odd. I'm going to pay a lot of attention to the road right now because we have a tractor up front that's taking up 2 lanes, and I'm very curious to see. Yeah, so the car, let's see. Yeah, so this guy's transporting a whole ass house on the road. Okay, so the car got over to the right lane. Yeah, I'm not too mad about that. I think what I would have done if I was driving the car, I would have probably, I don't know. I think it may have did so correctly. All right, so we have a 25 mile per hour exit here with a freaking house on the left. So let's see how the car does this. This is a very sharp right turn. Let's see if it Let's just see how it handles this. Perfect, dude, so good. Perfect. By the way, I haven't driven. This whole time we've been talking, and I haven't driven, you know? Let me try to end this podcast with sort of this, as it will stop here for the car to, I guess, wants to be as safe as humanly possible. We have a yield. There's no traffic coming on the left, so I should just go ahead and take this. Okay, is it going to? There's a car coming, it stopped, okay. So it's just trying to be safe. The one improvement that Tesla could do with yields is that it is hesitant at times, and then sometimes it's not. It's strange. So, but I'd rather it prioritize safety. I'm not mad about that. The guy that did that space on Twitter, Elon Musk, the guy who bought Twitter, the guy who had that conversation with BBC, is also in charge of this company too. This sort of car that's been driving itself for the last, call it, half hour, while I've been talking to y'all and sort of speaking my mind. And so think about what kind of future we're going into now, where we have cars that can drive themselves as it's going down the hill here, and it's handling it pretty well. No complaints. Yeah, the same guys created this company with the help of 100,000 people. So let's not overstate how much he's done. He's obviously a big piece of it, but a lot of people are a huge piece of that company. But I'm in the self-driving car, essentially. I haven't driven for the last 30 minutes. It's taken me from, right around where I live to the tennis court so I can go play tennis with my friend. And I haven't done anything as far as driving goes outside of paying attention and making sure the system is doing well, because I'm in the beta and I'm still responsible for driving the car. And with that same guy that helped create this has Twitter and is starting to disrupt the media landscape. He's disrupting the transportation landscape with this car, and now he has Twitter and is disrupting the media landscape with Twitter. And I think we saw a very big glimpse into what that looks like from the space from last night. And so let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think, where do you think this whole thing's going? Let's kind of keep it open-ended. Where do you think this whole thing's going? And what's even more interesting, as this person crosses the sidewalk and the car correctly slows down to allow the gentleman to pass, and it makes the right turn, and we're gonna stop it here because we've arrived. Fantastic. Where do you think this whole thing's going? You know? On the way back, I have my download for the latest version of beta as well. So I'm gonna make this a two-parter. So we were on 11.3.3, and I think we're gonna go on 11.3.6 on the way back. So I'm gonna record two parts. This will be the first part, and then the second part will be on the way back, and I'll release that as a second video. So, all right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you on the way back. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.